The thing about promises that is difficult for us to accept is the fact that faithfully waiting is usually a part of the process. And during the waiting period, it can be incredibly easy for our trust to shift away from God and towards the promise itself. Take Abraham and Isaac, for example. God promised Abraham that he would have a son, and through his son, his descendants would number the stars of the sky, and every family on earth would be blessed through him. Over time, as Abraham waited for the fulfillment of God's promise, his faith in God grew. At any point during this time, he could have started trusting in the promise itself, in Isaac. Because if God promised that Abraham would have that many descendants, among other things, and Isaac was the key to that promise, then trusting the promise is logical, right? Wrong. It seems like the right thing to do, because the promise is from God, but in reality, our trust should always remain in God, the promise giver, not the promise itself. But then God tested Abraham's faith. God asked Abraham to sacrifice the very thing that he told him he would bring about the promise through. Clearly, this was a difficult command for Abraham to wrap his head around, since Isaac's death would mean the loss of his child and the halting of God's promise. But Abraham didn't ponder too long on the details. Instead, he trusted the promise giver and hastily obeyed. Now, obviously we know that God never intended for Abraham to sacrifice his son. He was simply testing his faith, and Abraham passed that test. We can learn a lot from him. It was through years of trusting God and building a relationship with him that Abraham was able to boldly, confidently, and without question step out in faith even when it didn't make any sense. But this is not only a commentary on the faith and obedience of Abraham. It is also a reminder of God's immutability, his unchanging nature. Because even though the command seemed counterintuitive, he knew with every fiber of his being that God is faithful and would never backtrack on one of his promises. But that's all from me today. If you enjoy what God and I are doing here, please consider leaving a like, and let's continue this conversation down in the comments. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and as always, have an amazing rest of your day. I love you guys. God bless.